gonna create our controllers here. So we'll head into our app controllers. And the first thing we need to do inside this file is to import our Axios just by doing Axios from Axios. Oops. And the next thing we want to do is to make sure that we have the base URL inside our .env file. So why do we need this? Just because we don't want to repeat that uh, endpoint or that URL all the time. We're making requests with our backend API, or I mean our external API. And in this case, we just want to have that URL inside here so that every time we need it, we can just call it inside here. So I am going to create a variable here and call it base URL. And this is going to just grab our base URL. And once that's done, we need to create some functions. And that function is simply going to make a get request in order to get all the list of users. Remember, we want to get list of users from our our endpoint dummy JSON. And once we have the list of users, what we want to do is to display the first name and last name of our users. So that's exactly what we're going to do here. Need to make a get request, so get list of users from external API. And this is just going to be a basic function here, which I'm going to call get users from dummy JSON. So let's spell it this way. And in here, I want it to be an async function. So it can await Axios to make the request. And once we have that, we want to catch also the error. So we want that try and catch. Oops. And we want to grab whatever error we get from Axios, then just return it. This is what we want. We may also need to show it inside the console. And one thing we can do here is to return the response once Axios completes the request, and we can await that response and just have Axios.get, then specify our endpoint, which is going to be in this case base URL. And remember, when making requests to have the list of users, we have that slash users. So we need to add it here. And the get method needs a second parameter where we're going to specify our headers information. And let's have it this way. And remember, we had to specify this content, sorry, not contact, that content type, then application JSON. So this is what we want, application slash JSON. So this being done just means that Axios is going to make a get request to a dummy JSON slash user so we can have a list of users. And then once completed, we will have the list of users. Then we can, write some logic in order to um, extract the last name, the first name from the username. And this is not our controller. This is just a function. Now we want to create our controller, which is going to handle the endpoint also that we're going to create next. So we want it to be a get request because we are just going to make get requests here. And something I like doing is always mentioning the method type here because I'm inside the controller. I may not remember what this controller is doing or when is it getting called. And I may also, I also, this is something I do. I also specify the endpoint being the reason why this controller is going to be called. So I have this slash API, then I can say my hyphen users just to make a difference with the users that we have coming from our external endpoint. and this is going to be a function as well. I can call it get users names, and in here I want it to be an async also, which is a built-in now using Express. We do not need to install any additional package in order to have this power of async functions. And what we can do here is to get the list of our users. So how do we do this? I can simply create a response variable, and this response variable is going to have the await. Since we are inside an async function, I can still await this function which I've just created, uh, coming from, you know, allowing access to make the request. So once I have this here, we can actually console log this response and see what we get inside the console. So I'm just going to console log the response, and then this should be API slash my user, which does not exist yet. And we're going to create this route inside our app hyphen routes. I can just mention it here. So I want this to be my users. And instead of having this function here that we created earlier, I can just call the actual function. So I'm just going to copy it to avoid any typo. So get users names, and this is not getting exported yet. We may need to export this. So I'm just gonna we actually need to export this function. So I'm just gonna say export get users names, and this should work. And I need to import it also here inside this file. So let's have it here. So get names from, we want it to come out controllers, then app controllers dot js. Then we can paste the name here. Okay, we having some error. So export unexpected token export. Okay, let's check this out. We may need to have it this way, yeah, so that when we create additional, controllers, we can just add them inside this. So let's check it inside the browser. So again, we just created a new endpoint here, my hyphen users, and just by getting to this endpoint, we should have something inside the console. So I'm just going to have my users and then execute this. So in the browser, this is just going to, run without any response. So we still have our old response. But what happens is inside our console here, this is where we're going to have the response from the server. So remember, we are working in the backend, we're not in the front end. So since we have not sent any response inside our controller, so there is no response yet, all we're going to have, or where we're going to see the console logged, or the log from the console is going to be inside our code editor. So in here, we can see that we have the status code, which is 200, and this is the response that we're getting from Axios, and everything seemed to be in here. Maybe we may want to just console log data and .user so we can have the list of users, something we may do right now. And what I may need to do also is to check for any error, because this is not safe. Let's assume that we get some errors from Axios, anything goes wrong. We need to check that. So let's say catching errors, catching Axios errors. And to do that, we need to check if there is any error, or we can just check for the status code, because we've seen that in the response in the log we have here, we have some status. Let me go back quickly. So we've seen that we have some status right here, which is 200, and we can check for it every time there is every time this controller gets called, we can check here for the response.status and check if the status is actually different from 200. So in case the response status is not okay, that means something occurred during the request being made by Axios. And to avoid that or to catch that, we need to send this error to our error handler, and our error handler will be able to grab the error and then send the right status or display the right status code. And this is something we prepare here. I'm just going to create an error variable in which I'm going to say new error. And in here, I can write any type of error I want to. Let me say could not get a users from dummy JSON, because this is true. If we're getting any error here, that means our Axios library was not able to, get the data from the dummy JSON, and we may need to send some code. So this is not compulsory again, because remember in the error handler, if we don't send any status code, we have the default status code, which is 500. So you may want to do this or not. And then next is compulsory, because this is how you tell your controller to send this to the next middleware, who's responsible of catching, any error. So in here, we're going to send the error so that we send the status code alongside with the message of the error message. And if this is not getting executed, we can then continue our execution by creating some users variable that we want to create here. And inside the users variable, we can grab a list of our list of users, and we can simply say response.data. And in case that data exists, always good to check that to avoid any error. And then we can say we can send our response to the server, saying, or to the client, because the server is the client, requesting for data, requesting for a response from the server. So this is the server sending a response to the client, and this is how we send the response to the client. We say rest.status. We want to ensure the client that everything went well. The status code is 200. We have the data we requested dummy JSON for, and we can send those data which are the users. And that's basically it. And what we can do is to save this and execute this inside the browser so that we see uh, what we have in here. So there we go. We have all the list of users, our array of users that we should expect from dummy JSON. And we can also check that inside the console. In the network tab, after refreshing, we have a my user endpoint, which we have created, and the response is looking pretty fine. So I would like us to check this out also in Postman, something we can do to really see how it works there, and if there's any difference using dummy JSON as an API or using our own API in order to work with API tools like Postman. So let's jump into it. In Postman, I have created some folder here which I've named dummy JSON implementation, just like we did in the previous video. And we're going to make a get request here to see if we're able to get exactly the same response. So let me just head back to the browser. And something that I need to mention also is that I'm not using the online version, because when working locally, the online version cannot work. So you need to install the Postman software or client version in order to test your API locally. So I'm just gonna paste this endpoint in here, and instead of names, we want to have my users and send the request. So we make sure it's a get request. And when sending this request, we have our status code, which is 200. Okay. And we have all the list of our users. So this is how we can get data from a third-party API from an external API, and just use our own endpoints in order to, get those data. So back to our code editor, what we want to do is to be able to create some other function. Since we are able to get the list of all the users, we may want to create some endpoint who will be responsible of getting only a single user, just like we used to do it with DummyJson. So we want to be able to have like /1 in order to get the user having the ID 1. So it's pretty easy to do with a dummy JSON itself, but how do we get to do this with our own API? So this is something we're going to do next. And I want us to jump into the app route in order to create that route, first of all. And to do that, we can just add another get route here, and we need to add the slash, then semicolon ID. So by doing this, we are telling Express that you should expect some ID after this slash. And we're going to create this ID variable so that we can pass it when, calling this endpoint. And we want to change the name of the controller as well. We can call it get single username. So you can call it anything. I'm just going to copy and paste it right in here. And I'll do the same also inside app controllers. And I need to create that function. So again, best practices, you want to always mention the route and the method type so you don't get lost. You may end up with lots of controllers in this file. And we want to say /API my users, then /ID. My function is get single username. I want it to be an async function. And then I need to specify the parameters here, request, response, next. Then the first thing I need to do here is to grab the ID inside my request. So every time I will make a request in order to reach this endpoint, I will need to have this /API /my user /some ID. So the ID can be 2 or any number. But how do I grab this ID value and then know that this is the ID which is being passed? So to do that, I can create a simple variable here and destructure the ID coming from the request dot params. So the request dot params will hold all sort of parameter that we pass here inside our endpoint. So the first thing we can do is just to log it inside the console so that we make sure we are getting this. And I can simply head into the browser so that we take a look at how it works. So /2, for example, and this is not going to return any response. Remember, we get data inside the browser only when we send a response. So in this case, I'm just going to return to my code editor and see, look what we have inside the console. We have this 2. So this is how we get the the parameter from the endpoint just by destructuring this request.params, which has an object looking almost like this, looking like this, ID 2. So next we want to create our, function who will be responsible of taking this ID value and then telling DummyJson that, okay, I want some user having this ID too. And to do that, we can copy this entire function so we save some time. And let's paste it down here, create some space. And we need to say get a single user from external API. So how do we achieve that? First of all, we may need to pass some parameter. And this is going to be, let's call it user ID. This is just going to be the ID which we pass inside our endpoint that we're going to grab and then tell DummyJson that you should consider this ID that we are specifying as the ID of the user. So you can name it anything, but Remember, this is how we use to, get a single user from the API dummy JSON. So this is how we can simply achieve that. And I'm going to change the name of this function as well to get single user from dummy JSON. And I need to call this inside my single username. And I'll do the same. I'll just create a response here and await, since this is an async function, paste my function. And then here I need to pass the ID, which is the ID that we're getting from the endpoint. Remember? And something we can just copy and paste is catching errors in case something goes wrong when Axios is making the request to our dummy JSON API. Then we can do the same, just check for the response status code, send the error message to a error handler, then continue the execution. And this time, what we want is that we do not want to, do this data users, because we are actually expecting only a single user. So we are not going to get an array as a response. We're just going to get a JSON, or an object, which is a single user object. But we can still check inside the console to see how it looks like. Let's comment all this and just have, console log, then response. And in this case, I need to, yeah, I am having, so I just got the response instantly without having to refresh the page or to, you know, go to the browser. So let's check it out. It's quite long. We have this status code 200. We have all the information coming from Axios, and we are interested in the data which is undefined here. So we can check the URL to make sure everything is fine. DummyJson.com, we do have the user /2, but coming to the data, we have undefined. So how do we troubleshoot this? Yeah, so this one thing we can do is to return to the browser and try to send a new request. Let's try with one and send. What do we have in the console now? And to avoid all this, you can just have response.data instead of logging the entire response. And something we can do and have the user that we requested right in here with the ID 1. So this time I'm going to send the response to the server, and I'm just going to say const user, since we want to have only a single user, and then we just want to say dot data. And this time I'm just going to send user. We can return to the browser to check it out. And I want the user with the ID 5 and send. We have the response. So we can also check it out on Postman and ID 6, send. There we go. So this is how you can achieve, working with an external API inside your own API, because your backend is also considered as an API. And this is how you can manipulate the data and just do, whatever you want to do, whatever you want to achieve, working with your own API and external APIs. So that being said, that's all for me, and I'll see you in the next one.